Good morning, everyone. It has been Buckner and Dan Bossy with Ag Resource Company. Thursday, the 29th of January, ag markets this morning steady to a bit higher. Markets haven't been in the ag space been that much affected, but we look elsewhere and clearly it's a risk on and things like metals and energy based mostly on geopolitics. And I think there have been a lot of things impacting grain trade, and we haven't moved that much. And I think we'll get into why that is the case. But a lot of things happening in the background. I think it's been kind of a battle between this geopolitical uncertainty, which kind of rises or expands every week, against what supplies exist today, which are plentiful, and what supplies will be tomorrow. And I think they'll stay plentiful. We'll kind of get into things like weather patterns, vegetation health. So that battle, I think, has given us kind of choppiness since the middle part of the month. But there's a lot going on, kind of myriad issues impacting things. And we think outside of the fundamental drivers of ag price discovery. If you want to go ahead and break down what you are seeing, I'll pass it to you.
Well, Ben, you're right. There's a lot of things going on, and markets are made up of people, and people are made up of money. And so all of those come together and collide as we try to determine prices day to day and all those kind of things. You know, one of the big trades in the commodity markets have been looking backwards in time is the long metals trade. You could be long gold or silver against anything and pretty much make money. Of course, the gold is a new Bitcoin, as I call it. It is the crisis commodity. And so it used to be that because of fiat currencies and the real concern about that, and those people that are out there, they went to the cryptocurrency. But now, of course, that ended about the middle of last year, and they've now been flocking to the precious metals. You can see here a graphic, if you will, of the price of gold relative to the price of corn. And I'm here to tell you there is no relationship between the two. We don't price corn in gold. 1 ounce of gold may buy a certain amount of corn, however. But if you look backwards in history, there's really not much relationship of that. Though, again, I do believe on a short-term basis, when people see gold rising, $400 an ounce in a couple of days, they say, oh my God, inflation is here and all those kind of things. But, Ag Resource back in 2020 caught the inflation trade very well in the grain markets. The reason being is we had a phase one trade agreement with China. So it's not only the rising inflation, but it was also rising demand. So here we may have gold going sharply higher on crisis, geopolitical crisis. And we look at the same in the energies. We're up about $6 or $7 a barrel based on the concerns of Iran and Trump's saber rattling with that country from a military and geopolitical standpoint. But again, it causes rallies in markets for short periods of time on anxiety, but I don't think it's anything of a longer term trend. I see no evidence of inflation. I see no evidence of a dramatic expansion, if you will, of U.S. or world grain demand. And so those were the headstones, if you will, back in 2020. They gave us those big markets in the ag markets, but I don't see them here today. This graphic here, again, shows you gold relative to corn. We're now up around 5,000, if you will. Again, I think it's a meaningless relationship. And again, the crisis commodities of precious metals are doing very well. I think that's all it really says. And it is a herd trade right now where massive amounts of money are chasing these markets. And you got to be very, very careful. We're probably in the blow-off stage in some kind of rally in gold and silver as it sits today. Now, as you go forward and you look at other things in the grain markets, what's happening here, you can put your lights on export sales. And this week, again, we had decent sales, 20 million bushels of wheat, 65 million bushels of corn, 30 million bushels of beans. That bean sale included about 10 million bushels to China. This should be the last week of seeing any sales, of course, of U.S. soybeans to China. Also interesting is the 9 million bushels of sorghum that is unknown in China. So again, when we look at this, sales are good, but they're probably reaching their peak. And we would imagine as we go forward, we are going to see some retracement in terms of U.S. export sales, just based on where valuations are here today. Sorry about that. One other thing that's happening in spades is the icing up of the Mississippi and tributaries to the Mississippi River. It's been very cold across the central U.S. now for over 2 weeks. And this ice is getting deep. We had a barge caught yesterday in the Mississippi River that had to be untowed or unstuck. So as you look at this icing, it's really causing problems. Not only are we icing, but the flow down to Mississippi is very low because we haven't seen much melt and we haven't seen much rain, at least for the last couple of months. So this icing is real. And although the import community has secured enough cash grain, getting it on barge where it needs to be loaded on vessels is trying. And so we are looking at $1.20 to $1.30 over today on spot SIF levels, FOB and SIF, for grain moving down to Mississippi. Now, all of this is challenging for those involved in that trade. But as I stand back from it, it's also causing importers to back away from the United States. These costs are being added on to, of course, our normal pricing. And so we are now the most expensive trade in the world in terms of world corn, world wheat, moving that way in world soybeans. So the phones have stopped ringing, if you will, at major exporters. And as I talk to my friends in the export community, they are not nearly as busy and find themselves today as not finding much business at all. So I think this is important longer term, and this icing is not good for the longer term aspects of selling more grain. We are actually finding some firms looking at shifting their cargoes to other destinations based on their savings and costs by moving it to Brazil, or maybe moving it to Argentina in wheat, or Australia. These kind of things are something that will be looked at going forward. Yesterday, U.S. President Trump indicated that he was willing to get his political and his personal support behind E15. Now, again, we are all about building U.S. demand at Ag Resource. We think it's very positive for the U.S. farmer, though we were disappointed. We wanted to have a mandatory E15, not voluntary. E15, from our research, voluntarily will add maybe 50 to 300 million bushels to annual U.S. corn demand. We are not going to be building any new ethanol facilities. And I had several calls yesterday from ethanol producers saying my estimates of 100 to 200 million bushels of additional demand were too high. So again, the U.S. Corn Association, the other ag groups expended a lot of political capital getting this voluntary 15 opportunity out there. But again, I don't think it really builds U.S. grain demand all that much. And again, I'm happy for an additional 150 to 250 million bushels of extra corn demand. Don't get me wrong. But boy, if we had mandatory E15, that would have been 2.4 to 2.6 billion bushels of corn demand. That would have been changing to the markets and changing for the average U.S. farmer. So today, mandatory E15 is the way to go. And I'm now fearful that it will not come for years based on the political capital that has been wasted on voluntary E15. And so that's where my concern comes there. South American crop sizes and estimates from private sources continue to rise. Ag Resource, with our crop tours across the country now in week 3, are finding just exceptional yields. If you look at the NVDI ratings of the major producing provinces within Brazil, they're now at a record high for the past 6 weeks. People are talking about a U.S. or Brazilian soybean crop north of 185, somewhere between 185 and 191. It is a massive crop. So assuming we get some good finishing weather for southern Brazil, and we did have rain yesterday with RGDS, Santa Catarina, and Paraná, we are going to have a monster in terms of a Brazilian soybean crop. So when we think of that, keep that in the back of your mind. Also, as we look at weather conditions, unfortunately, that cold weather is going to hang on across the eastern U.S. That eastern U.S. Is going to be chilly all the way till the 10th of February. You can see the broad warming across the western U.S., which really finds itself into the central areas. So above normal temperatures there. This is a map of 5-day average anomaly temperatures for the North America. And your graphic on the right, of course, is Argentina and Brazil. Once we get beyond the next 5 or 6 days in that South America, we find ourselves without having any real excessive heat to be worried about, Ben. So as I stand back from the markets, yeah, we're going to see a day or two here where people get excited by gold and the geopolitics of crude oil moving higher, but it's not something lasting like 2020 or 2021. This is more transitory. And so when I think about where we're at and where we're going, I'm really worried or concerned, if you will, about as we think about the markets longer term. These provide opportunities for farmers and traders, and I think they need to be looking at them very carefully. Let's see what Trump wants to do in Argentina, but Iran. But Iran is a major importer, if you will, of agricultural goods, about 16 million metric tons of corn, wheat, soy meal, and other grain products. So back to you, Ben, and that's how we see things today.
Yeah, I think our recommendation to everyone, too, is keep it simple. I think you've got to, whatever Gold and Crude are doing what they're doing, whatever is happening between the U.S. and Iran, weather. You got to change balance sheets to change fair value. And so if you can't do that, E15 was disappointing. Iran may import less grain. You got to somehow change balance sheets to change price. And so that then our guiding light still is. And take it a step further, you've got really solid vegetation health in Brazil and northern India and North Africa and the Middle East. So we're kind of looking for supply issues, but can't really find them today. So we're making some moves in the markets this week. Probably will make some more if the bulls give us any more upside in the next couple of weeks. So $1 gets you in. Stay tuned for that. But yeah, choppiness certainly, but we are struggling to find the catalyst that really changes things. So we'll leave it there. We'll be back tomorrow and have a wonderful day trade.